So it's getting ready to jump, and I heard my inner voice. What if everything you've ever believed about everything is a lie?
Exploring the human journey.
My name is Victoria Reynolds. I'm an international speaker, best-selling author, host of Fearless and Free TV, and I teach humanity how to free themselves from the old fear-based reality we've been living in, how to recognize fear-based beliefs, and how to liberate themselves from the old patterns and beliefs they've been living their lives in. I had a realization when I was a teenager and I was standing on the edge of a cliff ready to jump, and my inner voice said to me, what if everything you've ever been told about everything is a lie? And what if there's something better out there? And to this day, I still use that approach. What if everything we're being told about everything is a lie? And what if there's a better world that's waiting for us that we get to create? And so everything I do now focuses on helping others break free from their old paradigms to create something entirely new for themselves, because the relationship we have with ourselves always determines the relationship we have with everything else in the world. And when each of us find that within ourselves, we can then be that for the rest of the world. And when enough of us do that, we completely change our entire reality.
So I was given the narrative that God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. And I had to do God's plan. I heard you speak Stairway to the Stars in Las Vegas, the end of 2023. And you said, you know, I used to hear, God has a wonderful plan for your life. And then you said, well, then it must not be working because my life sucks. And then I have no will, agency, or volition in it. And that got you started. And I was like, oh my God, there's somebody that has the same mindset. Tell me about that.
It took me a very long time to come to that conclusion, because when I was a little girl, I remember I must have been about 3 years old, going to church and hearing our prophet, because I grew up in this cult and we had our own prophet. God has your life all planned out for you. You're one of God's most chosen children. And so as a child, I thought that was fantastic. Oh, I get to be one of God's most chosen children, and he's chosen this amazing life for me. But then it wasn't so great. In that environment, I was molested, and I was abused, and I was raped, and by the time I got to be 17 years old, and I was standing on the edge of that cliff thinking about jumping, because my life was pure hell. And so I felt like I had three choices. I could live in hell in this little community I grew up in. I could jump and go straight to hell and just get it over with, which didn't sound too bad. Or I could figure out how to leave the community and spend the rest of my life in hell in the outside world. So for me, it was, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be a scary paradigm, because if you die, you commit suicide, does that mean you would have gone to hell? Is that what your mindset
Correct.
was? Okay, so you're thinking, well, I'm already in hell. How much worse can it be?
Right. The only difference is I would have hell for a short little period of time, and then, or spend eternity in hell. But here's one of the caveats for me. I had been told that your husband has to have at least 12 wives in order for me to get into heaven. And that I would be married to this guy that I got sealed to for eternity. So I would have to spend eternity potentially with this guy who called himself a god for eternity, making babies with someone I didn't like. That to me sounded like hell too. It was kind of like, well, no matter what I do, I end up in hell.
Why is it that all these weird cults always seem to benefit the man, and it seems to never benefit the lady?
Because we live in a patriarchal world. We live in a man's world still, and this isn't anything against men. It's that being able to understand the difference between men and patriarchies. So men are fantastic. It's the man-made systems, the patriarchal systems, that are the issue, that always benefit the masculine. And so a lot of these systems still believe that God created women for the purpose of serving men.
A man said that. No woman ever said that.
No woman
A
ever said
man.
that.
And then the women were somehow led to believe that that was their role. And then they're like, well, I guess, because I want to be a servant of God. I want to be faithful to God. And if this was God's will, then I'll do it. I imagine that was a big mindset.
Very much so. And it was taught to women that that's what God wanted them to do. That it's painted that it's for their own good. That women are intended to suffer in silence because God doesn't like annoying, complaining women.
Wow.
So, and so their entire reality exists to serve men, and that they can't they have to go through men to get to God. So if he's a good, godly, righteous man, then if they serve him, that means they're also serving God. So it's painted in a way that feminine subservience to the masculine is actually good for them.
It's your way to honor God by being a slave to a man, that you're just basically there to serve and to be his sex slave and to produce babies, and he gets his own planet and you get to be a wife forever. That just sounds like a horrible narrative.
Yeah, that's when I realized, I was like, wait, if that's what heaven is, I don't want that either.
What age were you? Did you say
16, 17?
Yeah. So you go, okay, I got to get out of this. So that's very bold of you to say, if I stay here, I'm going to die. So I may as well go to a cliff and jump off.
Right.
And logically, it makes sense. But for me, given that hell is conscious, eternal torment, I'd been like, man, well, if I die, I'll go to hell. It's conscious, eternal torment. What was going on in your mind?
It didn't matter, because no matter what I chose, it was going to be the same end result. So if I stayed and married this guy that my dad promised me to when I was 11 years old. I know. I didn't even have breasts at that point.
Oh my God.
I could have stayed and married that guy, or hoped that someone else shows up in the meantime. That would have been hell for me. And I would have ended up living this eternity in servitude to him, which to me didn't sound like heaven at all. It was just a patriarchal version of heaven. But it felt like hell. Or die and immediately go there and hope that somehow they were wrong and that's not so bad.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Because was that a possibility? I wonder if. Did you have that as a possibility?
Well, okay, because I have always, even when I was a little girl, I've always had this capacity to look at spiritual and religious concepts and extrapolate them differently than most people saw them.
Okay.
So it really confounded my parents and the men who ran the community and their religion, because I would look at an idea and go, oh, but it actually means this. And then I'd get yelled at because my interpretation of it was different.
But you were able to think and question your authority structures then?
No, I didn't question them, because as a girl, I wasn't allowed to have a voice.
Okay.
But internally, I questioned all of
but
it.
inside, you did feel some... Right.
It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so at a young age, you were able to say, yeah, these ideas they didn't feel good on the inside with your intuition. We didn't call it, I know, I didn't call it intuition. It was the voice of the Holy Spirit or whatever. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's good that you were able to go, something's not right here at a young age.
Yeah, about 4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I started questioning it when I was about 4 years old. And it didn't make sense to me. I wanted it to make sense because I wanted to do what God wanted me to do. I didn't think, parents don't intentionally misguide their children. And so I really wanted to believe that religion was true, because that's what my parents were telling me. It's what my religions were telling me. It's what the prophet was saying. It's like that this is God's one and only true church. I wanted to believe that.
Yep.
But there was a part of me, even when I was really young, that questioned it. It just didn't feel quite right for me.
Yep.
So one of the things I've discovered is on a soul level, it might be right for someone else because that's the journey that their soul has chosen to experience, but it wasn't right for me.
Yeah, smart. I like that. I like that you were able to connect into that intuitive space. And I know eventually you figured out it was your intuition, but even as a young person, you're like, well, you had this feeling that it just didn't feel right to you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was told not to listen to that voice because it was the devil trying to tempt me.
100%. I remember literally, I had family members sit down and say, if you have these feelings, it's the devil. The devil will trick you. So you can't trust your feelings. You can only trust the Bible. And the Bible says, and all of the earth mythologies that came along with that.
So we're told to disregard our internal voice, that voice of love and reason that is connected to the divine, that divine voice within us, to discard our own connection to divine knowing and trust the words of men instead.
Yeah. So you're going along as a child, doing the best you can, there to be honorable, to serve the divine, this God creative force in the universe. That's probably, if you had my narrative, I was a created being, if you had that. So you're here, it doesn't feel right. You're dealing with physical abuse, sexual abuse, you're dealing with all of the pressures that come with this narrative, and you're now at a cliff at 16-ish years old, and you're ready to step off. What happens next?
Yeah, I almost did. So I had decided just to get it over with. Why put hell off for another 40, 50, 60 years, right?
Because at your 16-year-old mind, you're assuming you're going to be in servitude as a slave.
Yeah, I'm either going to be a slave in this little community that I'm stuck in, or I'm going to figure out how to leave and go into the outside world. But what I've been told my entire life is the outside world was evil, that everybody in the outside world worked for the devil, and they would steal my soul and take me down the wrong path, and then I would do all these wrong things. And then I would end up going to hell because I would be what's called an apostate.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing you could do.
The worst thing to be is an apostate. Like once you become an apostate, it's like deal's over. Any deal you might have made with God is over because you're just going to go straight to hell anyway. So it's like, well, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm going to end up in the same place.
Yeah. When I heard you speak and share your story, I was like, finally, somebody that understands. Because I have friends that weren't raised in religion. They're like, that's the dumbest thing ever to believe that. There's a hell. And I'm like, you don't get it. When you're a little kid and you're told this, your mom and dad and your pastor and all your friends, that's the truth. You don't even think to question it. I never even thought to question it. It's just the truth. So I'm like, okay, you're trying to be a good person, but no one can. I always wanted to get counseling or therapy from someone outside the church, but I'm like, well, the devil's gonna trick me through them. They're gonna tell me something wrong, and I'll probably end up going to hell. So I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? But that's what we're told. It's like it's only safe in your little bubble, but if you step outside of that little bubble, whatever that belief system is, it's called BS for a reason.
It is.
Whatever that belief system is, then the devil's going to get you.
Yeah.
So I call that fear disguised as love. So our religiosities and all of our systems, even the media, it's all fear disguised as love. And if you can get past the facade of it being love and actually get to the root of it, then you can see all the fear. And what's fascinating is that the fear isn't from the divine, it's actually from the devil, if you would say, right? It's actually aligned with the dark side of the contrast. And fear is used as a means of control. And so we can see then after we break loose from those belief systems and come to the truth that the divine, that God is within all of us, then fear no longer is the driving force in our lives. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to get more into that. Move me backwards. 16, here's the cliff, ready to jump.
So it's getting ready to jump. And I heard my inner voice say to me, what if everything you've ever believed about everything is a lie?
Wow. A thought. What if?
What if? That was it. What if?
Well, that deserves more investigation.
It was enough to bring me back from the edge. It was enough to bring me back from the edge. And then my thought was, what if there's another way out? What if there's another way out? So if everything I've ever been told about everything is a lie, and I can find a way out, then what if there's a better life out there than what I've been told?
So hope is springing up.
Yeah. I call hope the spark of new life. So what happened is I was out there on the edge. I was in complete, total, utter hopelessness.
Oh, yeah. What was the distance? How far was it down?
I don't remember.
Was it like a chasm, or was it just like, would you have been injured and not died, or would you have died for sure?
I don't know. I had this idea that if I jumped and landed just right, like on my head, if I did a swan dive, then I would for sure die.
So you're even thinking about how to put, okay, I'm
Oh,
working
yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean,
Oh my
I
God.
had suicidal visions for 2 years before I finally decided to do it.
Yeah.
I played with suicide for the longest time. If I shoot myself, do I take pills? Do I cut myself? Do I run out in front of a car? It's not like I just woke up one day and said, oh, I'm going to go kill myself. This went on for about 2 years. And there was a girl that I had gone to high school with, and they found out that she had shot herself. Well, she didn't kill herself, but I was actually jealous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, man, if I had a gun, I wouldn't miss.
I
I
have,
just didn't have access to a pistol. And my dad's 30-06 wouldn't quite work.
yeah, oh geez. I've had the idea of like, if I killed myself and I jumped off of a building, what if it didn't kill me and it maimed me and then I had to live? So, you know.
You know what? I had those too.
Mhm.
What if I take the pills and they don't completely kill me, and then I'm a vegetable for the rest of my life, and that's even worse because then I even played with that. If I became a vegetable, then all those people who hurt me would know how much they hurt me. So,
So it's kind of justifying it.
Right, there was kind of that justification, like a little bit of vengeance.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I was like, I don't want to be a vegetable for the rest of my life. And then have my mom had to change my diaper when I'm 30 years old. No, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that when I did it, it would actually work.
So you've got the what if there's another possibility in life. What happens next?
Well, what's really interesting is that I'm pretty sure it was within just a couple of days. I went back home, pretended everything was fine. I would disappear for hours and hours and hours at a time. And my parents never seemed in the least bit concerned that I would get up in the morning and I would be gone for hours.
How many siblings? Were there a bunch of kids or just a few?
And there were 12 of us.
Oh my God, you had 12 siblings? Or 12 total, so they had 11 siblings.
11 siblings, yeah. So my mom and my dad was a polygamist, so I have 4 more siblings from his second marriage. So at that point, my mom had 12. Both of my oldest sisters and my mom were actually all pregnant at the same time.
Oh my God.
And so the family was starting to grow. At that point, my dad had 1 child with his second wife. They had just recently married. And so this place that I had walked to was probably about an hour hike up the mountains. And I would just go up there. Sometimes I would go up there and sit all day long, and then I would just wander back home. And it didn't seem like my parents really even cared that I would be gone all day long, because there were so many.
Who could keep track of
one
it?
less mouth to feed. I remember when my brother moved away from home, not long before that, my dad just said, thank goodness, one less mouth to feed. And I thought, so that's how I thought of myself.
It's like your parents were just doing God's duty to have a bunch of kids or something. Yeah.
Because they were earning brownie points with God. So their job was to bring souls to earth, but not necessarily give them the best upbringing. So I even had a conversation with my parents once about quantity versus quality. And I was talking to my mom, and I said, I wish you would have had less kids. And she said, who would you want me to not have? And I said, me.
Oh, wow.
I would have liked for me not to be born here.
Yeah.
And, that really upset her, because, now being a mom, I can understand what it is to love each one of your children. And that felt like, I know now that kind of like ripped a piece of her heart out when I said, I wish I'd never been born.
You can feel that emotion right now, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful.
So what happened when I stepped back from the cliff, a couple of days later, I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Utah, and she said, if you can find a way out, I have a place for you to stay. And that became my new focus. There's to look for a way out, look for a way out, look for a way out, because suddenly I'd been given the opportunity of a place to stay if I left. Because before that, I had run away from home once before, and the furthest I got was 15 miles away, and my dad found me, brought me home, and beat me.
Oh, you were punished, I suppose.
So it was like, okay, next time I run away from home, I'm going to have a plan.
Yeah.
And so when this friend called me and she said, I have a place for you to stay if you can find a way out, that was just enough hope to keep me going.
So then did you make it with that friend? What happened next?
Yeah, so what happened, it was actually a couple of months later, someone else in the community committed suicide.
Oh.
All of his relatives came from Utah. A bunch of his relatives came from Utah. I knew one of them, a teenage boy, my older brother's age. And I told him I lied. I said, "Oh, Mom and Dad said it's okay if I get a ride back with you, and this is where you can drop me off."
Mm.
And so I went home. I packed a brown paper bag with some pajamas and a change of clothes and my teddy bear and my toothbrush.
Mm.
And I left. I got in the back seat of that car, and he dropped me off in Salt Lake City at the
Wow.
house that my friend was staying at.
Hmm. You're 16, 17, is that?
Yeah, I just turned 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you are outside of prison. Do you have a plan? Do you know anything? You're probably indoctrinated in this certain mindset. So there's probably like you're exploring the world. And I mean, what happens?
I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea how to use money. One of my first things, I went to a restaurant with some friends not long after we were there, and they all got up and left, and they left a tip on the table. And I was like, "You guys, you left money on the table. What? Somebody needs to come and get their money."
Yeah.
And they said, "No, that's a tip." And I said, "What's that?"
Hmm.
I'd never actually eaten at a restaurant.
Mm-hmm. But that was a strange experience. People bringing you food, having a menu. I mean, everything.
Everything.
It's like you were
Everything was
a
new.
cave woman that woke up and suddenly you're in this new world, you know? Wow.
And I had no idea what to say, what to think. So a lot of my time I didn't say anything because I was so afraid that anything that came out of my mouth would be stupid.
Oh. So now you have, and not only are you trying to learn, you don't want to be outcast. You want to feel belonging, so you just don't talk because you don't feel stupid.
Right.
Wow. What happens
Right.
next?
So I lived in that house for about 6 months. I had what was great is this was a single mom. She had 2 teenage daughters.
Did you have people trying to find you, or were you in hiding?
Oh, no. But so what happened is I called home a couple of days later. My parents didn't even know I was missing.
Oh my God.
So I called home and I just said, I want you guys to know that I'm staying at a friend's house in Utah. And my dad said, "You come home right now." And I said, "No, I'm not coming back." And so they tried to get me to come back, but I just said, I'm not coming back. And then I called back again a few weeks later and I said, "I want to go to college." Now, understand I didn't finish high school. I only have a 10th grade education. I took the GED. I passed my GED so that I could get into college. I found a little nursing school that I wanted to go to. And so I called home. I was only 17. And I said, "I want to go to this nursing school." So I'd been taught the only careers that were acceptable for women were either nursing or teacher. And I didn't want to be a teacher. And so I decided.
That's funny because you're a teacher. You teach
I know.
people consciousness.
Yeah.
And you're so powerful. So I just find
and
comedy
that actually
in
is
that.
very funny.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't want to be because my idea of a teacher.
And you're also nursing people. So, okay, it all
Yeah.
works. It's working.
Well, I actually ended up working in the medical field for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had a couple of medical companies. So I wanted to go to this nursing school, and I called home and I had to ask my dad because my mom, as a woman, wasn't allowed to make decisions. So I asked my dad, I want to go to this college and I need you guys to sign my college papers.
Wow.
And he said, "Over my dead body is any daughter of mine going to college."
Oh, wow. Wow. Your dad was committed to this belief system. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And I said, "Well, then I'll get somebody else to sign the papers." So the lady that I was staying with signed papers for me as my guardian. And,
Okay.
yeah. So I put myself in school. I got a job at Wendy's doing the fast food thing that so many people do when they're first starting out in the world. And then I got an apartment with the roommate and one of the guys we worked with. So at 17, I was living completely on my own.
Yeah, you just went completely on rocket fuel out from where you were to
Yeah.
now you're in the world. Okay, so were you still trying to be a good person, or were you like, I'm gonna party, and what was that narrative?
So it was really interesting about that. I remember overhearing a lady say, "Oh, these kids, when they first leave, they go crazy and they want to try everything." And I wanted to like shake her and say, "That isn't the reason we do this." So I did drink. I had sex with people, too many people, boys. I never tried girls, right? And I did try some drugs, but it wasn't because I was going wild and I wanted to try everything. It was because I hurt so bad. I was trying to find a way to numb the pain.
Yeah.
So there's this misunderstanding that these kids leave and they just go wild and crazy and they want to try everything. And a lot of times it's like, well, it's not because they're going wild and crazy and they want to try everything. It's because they're trying to figure out how to numb what they feel inside because they're suffering so much. And can we actually see these kids for who they really are, as individuals who are suffering and not as kids that are wild and crazy?
Yeah, you want to be in a space where you're cared for, you feel safe, and you're not. So the people, your family, the parents, they're not safe. You're just trying to figure out, well, how do I feel? And it feels unsafe. So a little drugs, a little alcohol, a little disconnect from your body and sexuality or whatever that scenario was, and you're just like, I'm going to feel something besides these emotions and pains.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was trying to figure out how to deal with. I was still very suicidal. I was suicidal for about another 3 years, actually.
Because you're like, well, there's still that as an option then.
Right. And I couldn't find happy. I was just miserable. And I was afraid to tell anyone what was going on inside of me because I thought that they would lock me up.
Oh.
Because so that roommate ended up meeting someone and getting married, and I got a new roommate. And that roommate had actually been in an institution for anorexia. And so I thought if anybody knew what was going on inside my head, that they'd lock me up and I'd be stuck in a mental hospital and forgotten about. So I didn't tell anyone what was going on inside my head. Now, also back then, this is the 1980s, therapy wasn't considered real medicine. So the only people that got therapy were movie stars. People could actually afford to hire a therapist. So therapy wasn't an option. So I was going through life completely miserable, knowing there was something really wrong with me and not able to fix it. I was 21 years old. At that point, I had finished my little medical school and I put myself in the University of Utah. And I decided that I wanted to be a doctor until I saw how much math I'd have to take.
That is hilarious.
And I was like, I suck at math. I was actually taking math 50 because I'd only ever taken, as far as I'd gone in my math career was algebra, and I failed miserably at algebra. I couldn't figure out why there were letters in the middle of my numbers. So math was not my thing. So I decided, well, I want to be a psychologist instead, because I've always been fascinated by the human mind. Even when I was young, I'm fascinated by how the human mind works. So I was taking a psychology class, Psych 101. And in that class, the only thing I remembered from that class was that if you're unhappy with your life, it's because of something that happened to you in your childhood.
Oh, wow.
And that was like a light bulb went off. I went, oh, so this is how my mind works. If the way that I feel is because of something that happened in my childhood, that means I can fix it.
Oh, that's really a positive reframe.
Where everyone else said, I can blame my parents for the reason my life is so miserable.
Yep.
I had a completely different response. I refused to play the blame game. I refused to continue to be a victim. I was like, okay, if the reason I'm so miserable, that means there's a solution to it.
That is really powerful. Wow, because I deconstructed and still stayed in the victimhood of like, oh, the universe is against me, or oh, something subconsciousness isn't. I'm still not figuring it out. I mean, that's very powerful for you to go, oh, I can figure a way out of this, and I can do it. That is awesome.
This to see how my mind works.
Yeah.
So I do tend to focus on solutions. If there's a problem, there's always a solution to the problem.
Yeah, that's cool.
So what happened not long after that, I got introduced to a Center for Spiritual Living, and I discovered self-help books. So instead of going to therapy, I do what I call self-therapy. I read every self-help book I could get my hands on. I therapied myself. And a lot of those books, even back in the 1980s, were about no longer being a victim. The Road Less Traveled. It was one of my first books. Codependent No More was one of the first books I read.
So good.
And I started realizing that confirmation that I could actually fix myself.
That is so good. I stayed in that religious narrative until I was 45, and I started a talk show called Exploring the Human Journey. That was and has been and still is my therapy. So thank you, teacher.
Yeah, so I started my journey ages ago. I was 21 years old when I had my first spiritual awakening. And I went down the path of self-help books, and I had told myself back then, I was reading a book by Wayne Dyer, and I said, someday I'm going to write a book that helps other people the way these books have helped me.
I
It was a
love that.
promise that I had made to those authors that someday I would do for other people what those authors had done for me.
Mm.
You know, what's really fascinating about that is I wrote my first book in 2012, Transcending Fear.
Mm.
And I had written that book, and about 2 years later, I went to an event, and Wayne Dyer was one of the speakers. And I had that memory, that flashback memory I'd completely forgotten about. As I'm listening to him speak, I went, oh my gosh, I told myself I was going to write a book
Yeah.
to help other people. And I had already written the book.
Wow. Did you ever have a chance to communicate with him at all?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I did give him a copy of my book, but I'm sure 15 other people did too.
He goes, okay, and he puts it on this
Another book.
giant pile
Yeah.
next to him, you know. Yeah, he was such an inspiration to so many people.
Yeah.
I by the time I heard about Wayne Dyer, he had already passed, but he's given such a gift of just awakening consciousness for so many people.
Yeah, I saw him about 3 years before he passed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this beautiful flashback, a completely different kind of confirmation, but that was that beautiful confirmation of, oh, yes, I said I was going to do that. I set that intention 25 years earlier, and not even realizing that my subconscious had actually made that intention happen.
That's so cool. I love to see, exploring the human journey. I love to see how you flow through these spaces to go from an abusive situation, there's no hope, maybe there is hope, and then you start to, it's a journey, so it's just a lot of things going on.
Yes.
But now you're getting to a space of like personal empowerment, and you're like, I want to create things. So I know you have children, and I'm sure there's a story there. What was that like? Tell me about how your family and business, and now you're going through the 90s and the 2000s, and you're learning and growing, and you're coming into your own as a person. What's that journey like for you?
So I left home, right, just when I was 17. And it did take me about 10 years to really embody what I was learning through my books and through my self-talk, because I have a really powerful self-talk inner guide. I thought everybody did that. So I was like, yeah, everybody talks to themselves. Oh, but apparently not everybody does the way that my inner voice talks to me. And so I would read these books, and then my analytical self-talk, higher self, inner voice, the divine voice within me would explain that to me in a way that I understood. So by the time I was 27, I'd been at this self-improvement for 10 years. I decided, you know what, I'm actually ready to meet someone. I set very clear parameters for myself that I didn't want to meet someone until I felt good enough about myself to not bring too much of my baggage with me. So when I started this process, I hated myself. I despised myself enough at 17 that I wanted to kill myself because I hated myself so much. So by 27, I didn't love myself yet. I couldn't grasp what that meant, but I actually liked myself.
Interesting.
And I'd gotten to the point where I liked myself enough that maybe there could be someone to come into my life that would like me too.
Cool.
Yeah. So when I was 27, I met my husband, and he had been raised with the science, the teachings of Ernest Holman, Science of Mind
Science of
principles.
Mind, Ernest
So
Holman.
he didn't have any of that religious guilt and shame and belittlement and unworthiness to deal with.
So he had a little bit of an empowerment mindset.
Yeah.
That you could empower yourself through God, but using those principles.
But he didn't actually use God, right? So for him it was, yes, there is some power, but there wasn't really a name for it. It's that there is a power greater than myself, which assists me in creating my life.
I love that.
That was about the extent of his awareness. So we basically were atheists. It was like, yeah, maybe God exists, maybe God doesn't. Certainly not as a magic Santa Claus looking guy in the sky.
Love that.
But maybe there's a divine power, maybe there isn't, but we're going to keep going forward with our lives, because at that point he was like, he didn't have any of those issues. It was like, this is what my goal is. I'm going to make it happen. And it did. Everything he decided to do works. And so when I met him and we had read some of the same books or had been, he said later he didn't, but I interpreted it as reading the same books, but we knew a lot of the same authors and teachers and the science of mind principles. So that was enough to get my attention. I was like, oh, here's a guy who's actually on the same similar path. And I had never met a man that actually I could have those conversations with, because most men are just beer and football. Right? So here was a guy who actually had a higher consciousness than
I
that.
love beer and football, by the way.
Oh, yeah. But I'm talking about just beer and football, right?
I tease.
And so I met him, and the day I met him, I knew I was going to marry him.
Oh, wow.
The day I met him, and it was fascinating. It actually scared the crap out of me, because I was like, I actually met him. So I'd known ever since I was little that there was just one. So I've had some people say, oh, I have multiple soulmates. I'm like, I just knew there was just one. And
Did you mean soulmate as in like a lover soulmate?
Yeah, that I was.
Because Newton talks about soulmates not necessarily being lovers. It's just people that you really vibe with.
Oh, so I have a different interpretation for soulmate.
Okay.
So soulmates are actually souls that we have an agreement with. So for some people, a soulmate could be their dog. It's a soul they have an agreement with.
Yeah, I love that.
So in my particular case, it was, I knew there was just one person that I would marry and spend my life with. And when I met him, I knew it was him. I couldn't sleep that night because I knew I'd met the one.
Now, I hear in the pre-birth planning, souls may have these contracts, and then they'll say there's a way you're going to know I'm the one, and it might be a perfume, it might be a song, it might be the look in their eye. Did you have anything like that? That you just had something, some physical or something key?
Yes.
What was that?
So I had made a list, and I kid you not, it was 3 pages long, about what I wanted. If I were to ever meet someone, these are the qualities I wanted to know.
That's very forward.
Yes.
I like that.
But what was great about that, and I started that list at about 25, and every time I dated someone, I would put, okay, I didn't like this, and I put that on the list. I do like this, and I put that on the list. And a little description of why it was important. So at the very top of the list was honesty. But there were a lot of things I didn't put, which was so funny. I didn't put hair. So I ended up marrying a guy that was bald. But
you're funny. I like that.
And somebody said, you should have put that on the list. I was like, that's not that important to me. These are characteristics of a person. And they were all internal characteristics. But at the end of that list, I put all these things I expect from him, I also expect from myself. Because I know I can't expect someone to be something that I'm not also willing to be.
Wow, that is really cool. Not everybody thinks like that. It's just, I've got to meet somebody that I love and have this ooey gooey feeling, and we just make magical blah, blah, blah. But you're like, nope, I've got a whole list of self-development.
None of that was on my list.
Because that isn't as important as knowing you can share your heart with someone because they're hitting these same frequencies. Love that.
So what had happened the night before I met him, I had my big long list, and I said, you know what? I just want someone who's nice to me. I just want someone who's nice. Like when I put nice at the very top of the list, it was either nice or kind. And so when I met him, he said his favorite movie was this movie Harvey. I don't know if you ever heard the movie Harvey. It's a James Stewart flick from the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
And in the movie, he has an imaginary friend who's a puka, 6-foot white rabbit. But what he says in the film is something like, in life you can be oh so clever or oh so kind. I've tried being clever and I've chosen kind. And this is what this guy that I had just met said, and it was like I had just put that at the top of my list, that above everything else. But actually what I had said to myself, this is how I knew. I had said to myself, I will know when I meet this guy because he won't try to kiss me on the first date.
Wow. Okay.
Because every date I had ever been on, the guy tries to get something out of me.
Everybody's trying to get frisky with you.
Trying to get something.
Yep.
And so we went out, and I got in my car. He shook my hand.
Oh, that's so cool. Nice to meet you.
And I just was like, oh my God, I actually met him.
Wow.
Clear as day. I knew that I had met him.
Did you have did you have a time with him without kids, or did you have kids right away?
No, we were together for about 4 years before we got married.
Okay.
And then another 5 years before we had kids.
Yeah, I would jokingly say to my children, your mom and I had 4 years together before you guys were here. Greatest 4 years of our lives. And they're like, ugh. It's always kind of funny, tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
But that's a great time. Some people have kids right away, and that shakes up the dynamic. You had time to really get to know someone and go through your own personal growth and development.
Yeah, we had 9 years together before we had kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And for us, it was like, okay, the clock is ticking, right? Because I was nearing 40.
Before your first kid?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happened next?
What was really interesting is that in the meantime, I had started a couple of my own medical companies. So I went from this little nursing school. I didn't finish University of Utah because I didn't have enough incentive. So I went to college for the sole purpose of spiting my dad.
Yeah, just to piss him off.
Right? But when push comes to shove, spiting your parents isn't enough of a reason to finish college.
Yeah.
And no one had ever sold me on the benefits of finishing college. So I ended up not finishing University of Utah, although I still did have a nice big student loan to go with it.
Oh, boy.
It took me forever to pay off. But what ended up happening in that process, I ended up being homeless a lot because I didn't know how to make choices. I'd never been taught how to make decisions because as a child, I was never taught how to make choices because God had my life all chosen for me. And I couldn't grasp if I came to earth because there was a war in heaven for us to have free will choice.
I hate that. Yes.
But God had my life all planned out for me. What's the point of free will choice? I was so confused by that.
People would tell me, oh, set some goals and decide what you want to do. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. My goals have no importance at all. What I want to do, I have to do the Lord's will or else.
Yeah. So what I want is pointless. Whether I choose it pointless because God's already So
Wait.
here was one of my things. It was okay.
So many people don't understand that.
Yeah.
I really want people to get that. It's so important to know you have will, agency, and volition. And you, because we had that same narrative, you figured it out that you did have your own will. That is so powerful.
It took the longest time for me to figure that out. I was reading these books so that very first time I went to that spiritual center, the friend of mine said, this is back when I was 21. She said, you need to come to the spiritual center with me. The minister she's going to be talking about prosperity. And in my mind, I said, female minister? This I gotta see. Talking positively about money? This I really gotta see because I'd only ever seen a male minister talking about how money makes you an evil person. And so, because I grew up in an environment where if you had money, you had to immediately give it to the church because it was like a hot potato you didn't want to have your hands on. So we didn't just pay 10% tithing. My dad gave his entire paycheck to the church and then believed that the church would divvy back out. We lived in I call it communism because I grew up in a commune.
Oh, yeah.
And we practiced communism.
Yeah.
So everybody gave their paycheck to the church and then the bishop would decide who gets what.
Wow.
Supposedly equality.
Did the bishop have a little extravagant lifestyle compared to everybody else? Oh,
yeah.
It always works like that.
The upper 1% had beautiful homes and beautiful cars and the rest of us were barely scraping by.
That's why communism doesn't work because humans are greedy.
Yeah.
And they want power and control.
It's like, well, we're the ones that are in charge. Of course we deserve better things than everybody else. And that's something that I saw in high school. So my parents let me go to public high school. And after a lot of coercion, because the school in my community only went through 8th grade. And I was the first girl in the community to actually go to high school.
Oh, wow.
So I convinced my parents to let me go to high school. It obviously didn't work out well for me because I ended up dropping out of high school when I was 14 because I was sexually assaulted. But one of the things I learned about was communism. And because of the way my mind works, I went, that's what we call united order.
Oh, wow.
It's the same thing. So here we are battling communism, but in my little community, we're actually doing the same thing. And it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
I could see clear as day it doesn't work. And I couldn't understand why these people are dumb enough to fall for it. Then, 10 years later, because I'd never been taught how to make choices, because God had my life all planned out for me, here was one of my one of my conundrums, and I couldn't quite understand. If God had my entire life, it's like God knows everything you see, everything you do, God had it all planned out. My entire life is all planned out. If God knew every choice I made, He had already made for me. My life had already been planned out. Therefore, free will choice is pointless. It doesn't really exist if it's all planned out. Then God already knew that I was going to F things up
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to go to hell.
Mm.
So what was the point of being born?
Why did you make me come here to be born? I used to have that same
Yeah.
question.
Why?
What is the point of all?
It was like,
Do you want everybody to go to hell? What kind of monster are you?
yeah, it was like, and then you send a bully down to bully the kids. You call him Satan, and you put a bully and all of his bullies on the playground to tempt us.
Yeah, and
and
they're
then,
always
and then we're not supposed to go to hell if we accidentally get tricked by this guy.
It's all about being tricked.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was deconstructing as an adult in my mid 40s, I was like, wonder if all this self-help stuff is just a trick of the devil. I still had to fight that. I had to get rid of the idea there was a hell first.
Yeah.
And I had to study that. So once I got rid of hell, then I could go, oh, okay, maybe life does have possibilities, which then opened me up to new creations.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate that I started that in my 20s. I started deconstructing all this in my 20s.
Awesome.
And I had the hardest time grasping how God wasn't a man, how Jesus wasn't the savior of the entire world, and that I was such a horrible human being that I had to go through him, and that I felt so guilty every time I did something wrong because Jesus was carrying the burden for everything I did wrong. And all that guilt of making my big brother responsible for all of my mistakes. And so I had to learn how to deconstruct that. And it wasn't an overnight thing. And I had to learn. So one of the things I learned in that very first time I went to that spiritual center when I was 21, they said, you are the creator of your life, and you make the choices that determine the direction of your life. I had never heard such a thing. I was just, what? I remember I called home. I was like, you guys lied to me.
Wow, you are so forward.
You guys
so
lied
great.
to me.
Yeah.
I get to choose the direction of my life.
Yeah. You were angry.
I was pissed.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. And you know what my dad said? We didn't know.
Did your parents maintain that narrative, or did they ever have a change of mind?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they both my parents died in that religion. Yeah. But what happened eventually is my dad discovered self-help books.
So he had new possibilities.
Yeah, he actually discovered self-help books through Amway. He became an Amway distributor, and they have this huge self-help program. And he discovered all these great self-help books because he had to read one a month. And he actually called me up and he apologized. He said, I want to apologize for raising you the way that I did. I was not a good father, and I'm sorry. And he said, I love you. And I said, like hell you do.
Oh, boy.
And I slammed down the phone. I was like, how could you wait until I'm in my 20s to tell me that you love me? I'd never heard those words in my entire life. And it was the self-help books with Amway that were starting to break down some of those old paradigms. Now, those books are also still very religious-based because Amway is a very religious organization. But it allowed his mind to at least expand and see that there were some areas in his life that he needed to change. So he started going down the path of forgiveness and things that he otherwise wouldn't have been involved with. So the Course in Miracles is one of those. He actually got involved with the Course in Miracles.
Whoa, that is not like the Bible. So that is like consciousness being unfolded.
So he never went beyond his religious beliefs, because you have to understand that these religions do such a fantastic job of instilling fear that people are terrified to question what they believe.
It gives you your identity. This is who you are, is this narrative.
It's the label that they carry. It's like people like their boxes and they like their labels. And so for some of us to break down our boxes and tear off the labels is terrifying for some people.
Move me to the point where you're hearing this lady, the prosperity minister. What happens from there?
Yeah, sitting in the audience, just because everything was new. I'd never heard anything before. And after the sermon, We call it a sermon because it's not like they preach at you. It's these beautiful evolution of the divine, right? And so after that, the announcement was there's a bookstore and a coffee shop and cookies. So we all meet afterwards and have some coffee and cookies. And it's by love offering, by donation. And then we have a bookstore.
Love offering.
It's a love
I
offering.
remember that term. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that for a while. That's fun. Okay, yes.
It's a tip jar.
It's a
Right.
Christian-y term. It's a love
Oh,
offering.
I've never heard Christians say that.
Oh, yeah.
I've never heard Christians say that. That's a term I learned in the 1980s through New Age spirituality. Woo-woo
Yeah.
spirituality thing long before it was a Christian
So
thing.
you're at the bookstore and coffee and all that.
So yeah, so this is part of my shock. The shock and awe campaign was, they drink coffee at church?
Oh, yeah.
Remember, I grew up fundamentalist Mormon. They didn't
Yeah.
drink coffee, and they didn't drink wine.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus' blood was a glass of water. I won't even get into the human sacrifice that all that represents. But most Christians don't realize it's actually a satanic practice that they've been hornswoggled into.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so the fact that there was coffee at church shocked me. So I got my cup of coffee, and then I wandered around this bookstore. That's where I got introduced to self-help books.
So that was the synchronicity. And you went on that journey. Move me forward in time. So you're doing a family and business and life. How do you get to the point to where you are now as a speaker, author, teacher, thought leader, media provider? Give me how did you get to that? Because what happens with your relationship, your family?
2008 recession was a catalyst for my awakening and for a lot of other people. So for me, it was a catalyst for spiritual awakening. What had happened is I had got introduced to those self-help books when I was younger at spiritual centers. For some reason, I didn't put self-improvement and spirituality together, even though that's where I discovered self-improvement books.
Wow. Yeah.
And there was a point where I was like, oh, I don't need those anymore. I have arrived. So I stopped reading my self-help books and I traded them in for parenting books. I stopped taking care of myself and I gave all of my time and energy to being a mom and to running my medical business. I had a orthopedic supply company. And then I also started I sold that company, and then I started a OBGYN supply company, selling the same products, but to women's medicine instead of men's medicine. I had completely forgotten about all the self-improvement that I had done all those years. So 2008 happened. That was the catalyst. And I tell people that there's almost always a catalyst that involves an awakening. It's a death of some kind. It's a death of a child, the death of a business, the death of a dream, the death of a job, the death of a reality of some kind that causes us, that brings us to our knees and cracks us open so the divine can actually get in.
That's great.
So some people call it the come to Jesus moment, except for some people it's going back to church.
Yeah.
Which it did a little bit for me. I was standing in my, so what happened with the 2008 recession, I lost my business. My husband lost his business. Our house went into foreclosure. We lost everything in the stock market because the stock market crashed, and we had our nest egg in the stock market. His car was repoed, house in foreclosure, bankruptcy, and at the same time, my kids were diagnosed with learning disorders. So my life had hit rock bottom, and I was feeling suicidal again.
Oh, wow.
It took me all the way down to that bottomless pit of despair. And this time, though, I had enough knowing. Again, I go back to, I can figure out how to fix this. I'm going to figure out how to fix this. And that's when The Secret came out. Remember the movie The Secret? And I watched The Secret, and I went, oh, this isn't a secret. I know all this stuff. What it was for me is a reminder of what it is I had learned all those years earlier. So that brought me back to, that's right, I got to get back into taking care of myself again. So I started walking every morning. I started in 2009, doing my walking meditation every morning. My kids were really tiny. My baby was only maybe a year old, and I would get up and go for my walk every morning before the kids woke up. And if he woke up, I'd stick him in the stroller, still in his PJs, and we'd go for a walk. I was so committed to myself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But what happened one day, I was standing in my dining room, in my kitchen, and I heard, I wonder if Joel would go to church with me. Maybe he'd go to Mormon church with me. I was like, what? What if they're right? And then my inner voice said, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that is still in there.
Wow.
So I started on a new mission to figure out how to get that out of my head.
Yeah.
So then I go back to when I was 17 with the what if everything you've ever been told is a lie. And then there's this new what if they were right. It's like, okay, I got to get to the bottom of this. What also happened at the same time, my daughter was in 5, 6 years old, and she said, Mommy, the kids and I were talking at school about God. And I said, your dad and I don't believe in God. That word is not allowed in our house.
You went hardcore on the pendulum to swing to the other side.
Yeah. And she started crying. And I said, okay, I had to really think about this. Because I was just starting on the path of conscious parenting. I knew I wanted conscious parenting with my kids. And so I thought about this, and I said, it's not that Daddy and I don't believe in God. It's just that for us, God's more like Mother Nature. And she said, oh, okay. And that was all she needed. Because for me, God is more like Mother Nature, but it's this beautiful force that is what creates our reality. Isn't some magic man in the sky, it's the earth herself.
Yeah.
And so...
And that kid wasn't given the whole narrative
she didn't have any of that other stuff.
The stuff you had been loaded with.
The kids at school had been talking about God. So what happened, I call her my spiritual catalyst because she started sharing concepts with me that I didn't even know were a thing. So when I go back to when I was her age and ask my parents spiritual things, they would say, oh, no, don't ask those questions. This is just how God made it. Ooh. What I said is kids know things about things. So I'm going to listen to what she has to say. I think I can learn something from her. So she would say things like, Mommy, sometimes when I'm sleeping, I leave and I go play with my angel friends.
Whoa.
I had never said the word angel in my house, ever. And I thought, well, maybe angels are real. If she leaves her body at night and goes and plays with the other angels, wow. And then she said to me one time, Mommy, sometimes I can be in 2 places at the same time. And then she would tell me about the other beings that live in our house with us. That little girl cracked my mind open to maybe there's something much bigger than the little teeny microscopic reality my religion had told me about. Yeah. That we're it. The human beings are the end-all be-all of God's creation. And I started laughing. I was like, if this is as good as God can do, that's pretty sad because human beings have a lot of work to do. So between her, with the spiritual catalyst and this experience I'd had that was cracking me open, that got me out of ego because I needed to fix my life, that actually took me down this path. And I would get up and go for my walk every morning. And going for my walk, these messages started coming in about how to fix my life. I had notebooks everywhere. This was before smartphones. So I'd be in the shower and this message would start coming in and I'd write it in my notebook. And in my diaper bag, I'd be writing notes in my diaper bag. And eventually I decided to put those on the computer because I had it in so many different notebooks. It actually, on its own, became like a puzzle. And that's what became my first book.
That's cool.
And then someone said to me, oh, well, if you're going to be an author, then you need to also be a coach of some kind. You have to be a coach if you're going to be an author.
It's the pattern.
And I had already started wanting to be a public speaker, but I didn't want to be a public speaker to sell my stuff. I wanted to be a public speaker because I was writing another book about my childhood, which I'm still writing. 20 years later, I'm still working on it. And because I have a vision for what I want it to be. That's actually a narrative novel, not a memoir. So it's taken me a little while to write it because that's different than my other books. The writing style is completely different. So I ended up deciding to be a coach because I had to be a coach because I wrote a book and I was taking speaking classes. And if you're going to be a speaker, then you also have to be a coach. It was like, you got to be a author, speaker, coach, author, speaker, coach, author, speaker, coach. So I went down that path. But what's interesting is it never resonated with me. I never could call myself a coach. It just didn't work for me. But what's really interesting is that a couple of years ago, and I have people actually email me and ask me if they can have a session with me. I really have not, because my purpose for teaching isn't to sell my stuff. My purpose for teaching is for people to find that divine knowing within themselves.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that I had students start calling me a spiritual luminary. It wasn't a title I picked for myself. It's a name that other people started calling me.
That's cool.
And I've had a couple people calling me a spiritual savant. And I thought, that's really interesting. And when I look up the meaning of the word savant, it makes sense. There are other things in the human realm that just make no sense to me at all. I still can't do math for the life of me unless I have a calculator.
It's hard for me to even play blackjack. I can't. I'm like, 16. Okay, that one's.
I have to count on my fingers too because it doesn't. It's like
17,
it's my
18,
crutch.
19, 20, 20. Okay, a 5 would get. Okay, come on, 5. I have to do it. Meanwhile, everybody else is like calculators in the brain.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure that out. So with my husband, I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And he said, well, it's 10 base math. I'm like, what's 10 base math? So he actually had to teach me what 10 base math is. So we all have our genius. My genius just happens to be the ability to extrapolate spiritual concepts and to make them grounded in a way that people understand.
Yeah, that's powerful. There's so many things that you've had to go through that you've assimilated from all of these various sources along with your intuition. I love the pre-birth planning scenarios that I read about where they say the soul chooses these journeys, chooses things. Why did your soul choose the religious trauma and abuse that you had to suffer?
I am so glad you asked me that because I didn't really understand that until around 2009. Remember, I was in my car on the way to my Toastmasters meeting and this whole download came in that I chose. God didn't choose to put me in that environment. I chose to put me in that environment. And then I had to think about that. Why in the world would I choose to put myself in such a painful experience? And what I came to understand is I could not teach what I'm here to teach if I hadn't experienced what I experienced. That's how we learn how to love our backstory. Because we can't teach what we don't know. So I had to experience that. And it was also incredibly empowering because then I realized, there was blaming God all these years for making me have such a horrible life. And it came back to self-responsibility. And self-responsibility is incredibly empowering. That's one of the things I learned when I was 21 years old with those books is the power of self-responsibility, where people want to blame everyone else. They want to stay in victimization of their circumstances. But as long as you keep yourself a victim of your circumstances, you're not empowered to change your life. You can either be a victim or you can be self-empowered, but you can't be both. So you choose to be self-empowered. You choose to take self-responsibility. Then you are no longer the victim of your life experiences. I was fortunate enough to discover that in my early 20s. But what was interesting is that in my 40s, when I had that download, if you will, it came back to no longer blaming God for my circumstances. Because on a soul level, I chose that experience.
Isn't that the most powerful thing that we can learn is we're not a victim. We chose this at the spiritual life between lives space. Before you come here, you choose these things.
Absolutely. It's incredibly self-empowering because then we live our lives with a complete understanding that we are the ones who create our reality. It's not created by any. Now we intercreate our reality. We co-create with Source. We intercreate with each other. We actually are all one. What you do, the choices you make affect the choices I make and vice versa. You made the choice to be here. I made the choice to be here. And now here we are. Right? So it's always an intercreation. And when we understand that we're responsible for the choices, now stuff happens in our life. We might not have chosen the specifics of the lessons that we want to learn or exactly how we're going to arrive at those circumstances. Because if we think about choices, for me, it's a field. It's not a timeline, there's a field, and in that field of creation there are infinite number of choices we can make, but we have, as a soul, we have different plot points within that field of how I get from here to here could be any number of ways, but there are certain plot points in our life that we as a soul have placed. People will come in and out of our lives with their own stuff. We get to choose what we do with the experience.
I love that. And Newton talks about the pre-birth planning is being a straight line, and then there's a branch possible, branch possible, branch possible, and that's our free will choices. And they're like, oh, well, now we make a new timeline. What would that be like?
And then you can come back to the same plot point. It might just have a detour to get back to the main road. So we do go on detours, and sometimes like, oh yeah, I detoured way off on that one, right? Or there have been visuals where I'm like, okay, here's my path, and I'm in the gutter next to the path. I just have to get right back on path. And so it really comes back to the recognition, the remembrance that we are the creators of our lives.
That is the most important thing I want people to know. That you're not a victim, you chose this. And the reason you chose that isn't to pass a test. It's not to get it right. It's not to try to ascend higher. It's simply to have experiences. And from these experiences, what do I feel? How does that work? And appreciation for all of those bad things is the greatest thing that you can do. Oh, I just simply appreciate it. I had a child that died of a drug overdose. I appreciate the fact that I have that experience now. Doesn't mean I wanted it. That doesn't mean I'm happy about it. But the experience that has happened, I appreciate the experience, and that gets me out of the sad and because I'm like, okay, it was an experience.
And what I love about that too, one of the misinterpretations of the law of attraction is that I must have done something to attract this.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Because that's not how it works. We don't attract the suffering in our lives. People come in and out of our lives, and how we maneuver what happens in our lives determines the outcome of the experience. You didn't attract what happened to your son. That was him on his path. It
was clearly his journey he needed to take.
Yeah. And you got to play the role of being his dad. But you didn't attract that suffering. You didn't, I must have done something horrible in my life. It's just another, I call it New Age guilt. Isn't any different than religious guilt. It's the same thing.
I'd say New Age victimhood, that I'm a victim of whatever I put out, the wrong vibration. It's still that same.
But it isn't any different than I must have done something to make God angry, and so God made this horrible thing happen to me. It's the same thing, just with a different label. And it's just as shaming in the New Age movement as it is in the religious movement, to shame someone for causing God or the universe to be so angry to experience this suffering. So no, we don't attract it. It is every person making the decisions that they make, and they flow in and out of our lives. It's what we do with it. So every experience is an opportunity for learning. What can I learn from this experience so I don't make that same mistake again?
All right, so I took notes from from your talk, and you talked about taking on religion, and you said you can't take on religion because you had this idea for a new book or some work of trying to help people get out of these paradigms. And you said, I feel like I want to take on religion. And I was thinking at the time, like, boy, I can't do that because I'm so angry right now. And then you go, but then I heard you can't take on religion if you're still angry by it. I was like, whoa, it's like you were reading my mind. There's something empowering about realizing you weren't a victim. Oh, I chose to have that experience of trauma or abuse or even just a narrative of shame and guilt. Oh, so I'm now at the space where I'm like, okay, I can appreciate I felt like a victim. I know what it feels like all my life to feel that way. How are you moving into this next realm of the work that you do, helping people with ideas? I know you're involved in a lot of things. You're doing media. You are a great speaker. You have a lot of books. You've written a lot of material. What's the things that you're bringing into the world? What are the things your soul is here to do and to create?
Well, ultimately, I'm here to create conscious entertainment, conscious media. I wasn't able to step into that role the way that I knew at some point I would step into because I was raising kids. I've now finished with that role of full-time mom. My children have now officially finished high school, and now I get to step into that next role. And part of that is a willingness to detach from everything. And then this is really, really difficult for human beings because we're so attached to our stuff. We're attached to how we think things should be. We're attached to how we think the plan needs to roll out. We're attached to where our kids go to school. We're attached to attached to our physical things, but we're also tend to be attached to our mental and emotional stuff as well. And we all have too much stuff.
Yep.
So we got to let go of everything that doesn't serve our highest and greatest good, which is really difficult for most human beings because we are attached to ourselves. We carry our labels by how much stuff we carry around with us.
And our identity too.
We've got to drag the 15 bags of luggage so that we're trying to. So it's really funny to get these people who say, I want to ascend into 5D and I don't want to drop any of my baggage. I want to bring it all with me.
Exactly.
You don't get to.
Exactly.
It's like if you want to ascend into a new realm of consciousness, you can't take your baggage with you.
Yeah.
So what else do you need to let go of? For about the previous 5 years, I've been asking myself since 2018, what else do I need to let go of? What else do I need to let go of? What else do I need to let go of? And it's constantly letting go, going around my house. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that anymore. And giving everything away. And I finally realized, and what I kept hearing is you need to be willing to let go of everything. Now, this isn't necessarily for everybody. For me, it is because part of my role on the planet is to teach fearlessness and freedom. If I can't be entirely fearless and free, then how can I teach that to others?
Yeah.
And everything. I was like, really? My kids, my husband, my house? Yes. So in 2020, I let go of my husband. He's the love of my life. But I had to let him go because our contract was complete. When we talk about soul contracts, our contract was complete. It was time to let him go. Then I started letting go of my home. I put my house on Airbnb, which required me to pretty much move out of my house. All that was left is a closet full of clothes. When I'm in between, my kids went to live with their dad for the most part because people were always in my house. So I started learning how to detach from my house, and I'd been there for 30 years. It's the only home I'd known, really. Because I've been homeless so many times, I finally settled somewhere, and then then my children graduated from high school, so then I was able to let go of my house. So I have detached from everything, and I had told myself at the beginning of 2023, I want to live my life completely free of fear.
Wow.
Which means I need to live my life in complete, absolute knowing that the divine has me. And that I'm on the path that my soul wants me to be on with no attachments to any of it. That allows me to not even know. Again, when people say, you're homeless, I'm home free. And sometimes I have no idea where I'm going to be the next week.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that because I live my life in complete, absolute trust.
That is so good. And it gives you that opportunity to do travel and to do speaking events and to do the work that your soul is here to create in the world.
And I don't have a husband or kids to be responsible or a house that I have to maintain. It actually allows me to be completely free. So if I get guided to go speak at an event in Mexico, I can, which is what I did a couple of weeks ago.
Cool.
So I can just pick up and go because I don't have any of the human attachments. That's actually what Buddha meant when he said, there's a misunderstanding, a lot of misunderstanding about what Yeshua, as I prefer to call Jesus, said. So much misunderstanding of what he actually said. And one of the quotes that Buddha said that he's known for saying is that suffering is in desire. And he actually explained to me a few years ago when my kids went to live with their dad, and I went back down into the very bottomless pit of despair because my kids chose him over me. Wow. It's a longer story than that, but
I'm sure that had to bring up some more experiential feelings that you had too.
Oh, it took me for a few hours. I went down to the bottomless pit of, if I can't be their mom, then what's the point of living?
Oh boy, isn't it so easy to get into that space? What's the point?
What's the point of living if I can't have my kids? And that didn't last for that long because my inner voice is like, come on. You did not come here to be a mom. You came here to be a guide for humanity.
Yeah.
And
Well,
being a mom was just part of that experience.
while we're at this space, because it keeps running in through my head, you know, why not just kill yourself and exit out of the game? Because you know this is just a human game that we're playing, and if things aren't going well, why not just kill yourself? And then I'm like, oh, because I'm a spiritual being, I probably chose this, I shouldn't die. How do you frame that thing as a spiritual being, going, well, if I just kill myself, then I can just go back to the all that is, perfect bliss? I mean, what's your mindset on that narrative?
It's a cop-out.
Yeah. I like
It's a cop-out. We didn't come here to quit,
Yes.
and I'm not going to quit,
Love it. I love it.
right? And some people, yeah, it's tempting when you start to realize that hell isn't the fate, but that we all return back to the loving.
Mm-hmm.
That outside of this human, I call it a video game, this human experience we're all playing right now, outside of this, we go back to the divine presence. And then who wouldn't want to get out of this? Because Earth is not an easy game to play.
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
absolutely.
right?
We chose level 11 out of 10 on this one, most of the cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And only the strongest souls choose
I love that.
the human experience.
Because I like to tell people, if you're here on Earth, you're a ninja. You're a badass if you
Yeah.
chose to come here. So as negative as you might get in your mind, oh, I'm unworthy and I'm whatever those, I can't do, it's too hard. Okay, well, just the fact that you came here as a spiritual being, you're a badass. So I want to let people know.
Yeah. It's like Destiny level 12.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about video games.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we don't quit.
Mm-hmm. So
And if you don't quit, it can get really, really good.
Yes. And so there's a joy of doing your soul's purpose. As we wrap up, kind of put together the synthesis of where you are. This is just a snapshot in time. This conversation that we're recording here, it'll change tomorrow, it'll change next week, it'll change next year, etc. It'll change in an hour from now. What's the snapshot? Where are you? Your soul purpose, the things you're doing. Give me that.
So I just started on this new path, this new part of my path when I sold my house and I got the guidance to become a nomad. I call myself a spiritual nomad.
Spiritual nomad.
Right? And that is when I started on this new path that I knew at some point would start coming into my life, which was that of becoming a filmmaker and conscious media. And so about this time last year, I started hearing, because my inner voice is always present, this is the year. This is because I've been asking myself, so when am I going to start making conscious media? I've known for 15 years.
Yeah.
This is the year. And so when I tuned in and I said, they'll show me my path, and I was looking down, show me my path, and what I was told is look up.
Oh.
It's a flight path.
Oh, wow, I love that.
And so I now it's really funny because now I actually live under a flight path, which is quite hysterical with all these little confirmations that I get. So this year, I started in 2023 on this flight path, and I started getting footage for this spiritual travel show that I'm working on. And I started making more connections in the film industry and what I called conscious media alignments that are starting to fall into place. So I'm moving onto bigger stages in the world. I do have more books coming. However, the book I'm focusing on now is finally finishing that book about my childhood because I've been told that it's now time to finish that.
Okay.
So that's my focus for this year. And creating conscious media content, taking it up a notch and reaching the masses with this content that is beautifully spiritual, but it doesn't butt up against their religious beliefs. Because as soon as we butt up against someone's BS, they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ego wants to go into self-defense. So how can we have these conversations that don't put people's belief systems on defense? And instead it just starts melting the ego so the divine can get in.
Wow. That's really good to be able to do that. For me, it's hard for me to try to do something that is accessible for someone in a deep religious victimhood narrative, because I'm like, I'm going to set you free from that. You're in a prison of your own hell. How do you navigate that?
You can't tell people what to think.
Mm-hmm.
Telling people what to think does not work.
Absolutely.
We show by example. So I talk a lot about show and tell. Remember when we were kids?
Yep.
Well, I didn't do show and tell, but my kids did show and tell. And the difference is you can tell people all day long and preach at them, like they go to church and they get preached at all day long. You can tell people what to think, or you can show them something better
Mm-hmm.
and let them see for themselves. So one of the things I remind people is that Yeshua was a master teacher. He was a master storyteller. The way to reach the masses is through telling better stories. The reason he's still remembered 2,000 years later is because of his stories,
That's cool.
the parables that he told.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew to tell stories that reached people where they are. He never told people what to think. He told stories that allowed people to think for themselves. So wherever you are in your life, if you go back and read his parables, they'll read differently now than they did 10 years ago. Because you're different.
Yeah, your consciousness is continuing
Your consciousness
to
has
move
changed.
and evolve.
And he understood that.
Mm-hmm.
You tell stories, and then where a person is will determine how they understand the story.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. All right, tell people how they can find you, your online presence, and how they can connect with your work.
The best way to reach me is on my website, victoriareynolds.com. That's where all of my books are, and I do one-on-one sessions with clients. I have some classes I'm working on recreating, and I do have, like I said, I do private sessions, so people will reach out to me if they want to hear from their own guides, because I work with other people's higher selves and their own spirit guidance. I have my private YouTube channel, my personal YouTube channel, which is just Victoria Reynolds, and I also have Fearless and Free TV. I'm in the process of revamping Fearless and Free TV, and I'm really excited because there's going to be a lot of content on there. Some new shows that aren't just mine. I actually have some really interesting and great shows that are coming to Fearless and Free TV.
Cool. Well, I love what you're doing. I thank you for giving us some of the highlights of your human journey. I know it's very robust, and there's a lot that there's a lot that you've experienced and you've gone through. And, you can't overcome everything. Sometimes you just have to go through it.
You have to go through it.
And, because of that, we all know that there's a reason why we go through these things. And I can see your light in the world. It's bright. I can see your powerful essence of who you are. You've really transformed that victimhood into empowerment, and you're now a light bringer to other people. And you're not a light worker, you're a light leader. You're really a leader in this field. So thank you for what you're doing. If at the end of this thing, someone's like, you've said a lot of stuff, what's the one thing you want people to know from everything that you've done and all the work that you've done?
The key to living a joy-filled life is to recognize the role that fear has played in it. And as you break through those fear-based beliefs and you transcend them, in a sense, that's actually where heaven on earth is experienced. Because heaven is within.
I love that. Victoria, thank you so much for being a part of my human journey today. And to you, my friend, I say, namaste.
Namaste to you too.
Thanks for joining us here on Exploring the Human Journey. For more information, go to the website at exploringthehumanjourney.com.